Let's fill out the transitions workbook together. All right, so I had spent a month now making this transitions workbook. You guys have no idea how much effort it took to have to not only do the research, but also take all of these concepts, information, and also my own experiences being a woman living with autism and ADHD, figure out a way to process the ways that we can struggle with transitions, figure out the mechanisms behind it, the functioning behind it, figure out how to break that down into metaphors and explain it to people. My God, let me tell you guys, the first week where I was beginning this project, I focused so hard on this that I spent hours from morning till 10 p.m. at night, day by day by day, just working on this workbook. I didn't take breaks to eat. I didn't take breaks to drink. I barely took bathroom breaks. I was just completely sucked into it. The amount of horrible migraines that I sent myself into at the end of these work days, I had to put heating pads on my head. It was so bad. But all of this to say, I am so passionate about making these sort of workbooks because for those of you who don't know, I have a background in being a behavioral technician. And so as a behavioral technician, you learn the mechanisms of behaviors and the functions of behaviors. It's almost like objectifying very subjective things. So a person and their personality is made up of just behavior patterns, right? When you're a behavioral technician, you learn to study these behaviors, figure out not only how do they form, but also what function do these behaviors serve for you, and therefore how are you positively impacted by those behaviors? Likewise, what aspects of those behaviors can also negatively impact you? I truly believe in that ideology of not demonizing a behavior as either good or bad. A really simple example of this is a person who has a tendency to shut their emotions down in high stakes situations so that they could listen and respond appropriately. The act of shutting your emotions down during moments like that, it could have negative impacts on you. Negative impacts in a way where you begin to shut your emotions down anytime you're stressed out, which then impacts your relationships with other people negatively, because in certain situations where you have to be empathetic and emotionally connected, you are unable to do so. But likewise, the other side of that coin is that shutting your emotions down does have positive outcomes. It does allow you to critically think a lot better and work through things a lot more fluidly. I'm saying all of this because I want you guys to have an idea of where I'm coming from when I make workbooks like this. When I am talking about all of the ways that we are affected by transitions, I am trying to figure out exactly what mechanisms about our neurology impacts our inability or ability to transition properly. But either way, my goal here is for you to figure out the specific ways in which you struggle. So what are the specific ways in which you need to integrate better transitions into your life? And so if you haven't already, go to my Etsy shop. I will leave the link down in the description box below and purchase this workbook for yourself if you want to go ahead and fill this out along with me. I like to always do these workbook walkthroughs because the concepts that I am exploring and the way that I'm exploring it is a little bit abstract in a way. And so I feel like it's helpful to have me really walk you through that process. And like I always say, this is about the honor system, right? My goal is to make information like this accessible to autistic folks, which is why I price my workbooks to be pretty low, because it's honestly not about me making a lot of money. And that isn't also to say that money isn't important. I have to make money too. That's what it comes down to, right? I have bills to pay. I have to support myself too. And so there has to be some sort of symbiotic exchange here. I spend a lot of time, effort, care to create workbooks like this and make it accessible to others by making it really, really affordable. And people could therefore pay for these types of products and allow me to then continue making the content that I'm making and making workbooks like this. That's how the symbiotic relationship is formed. If there are any people out there who can't afford to pay $5 or $7 for a workbook, that's fine. That's why this video could be helpful, because you could very much so sit there with blank sheets of paper and fill out the workbook alongside with me, even though you didn't purchase the workbook from my shop itself. Again, this is about the honor system, right? Support me as I try to support you guys. It's really that simple. I will say I did make this workbook a little bit more expensive than usual. I usually price it at $5, but this one is $7 just because this workbook took so much more time, effort, and it's objectively a lot longer than my other workbooks, and it breaks down a lot more complex concepts. Make sure you get comfy because this might take some time. Get yourself a drink, get your workbooks out, get it uploaded onto GoodNotes, or if you like to write things down physically, print the workbook out and have it ready, and let's fill it out together. It's titled Transitions, Neurodivergent-Affirming Workbook that helps you understand why you may struggle with transitions and neurodivergent-friendly ways to approach it. To simply put it, how do we still be functional people, but function in a way that makes sense to us so that we can not only function properly, but it's sustainable to us. You know, up until now, I feel like those of us who found ways to function properly don't live sustainable lives. And so we're always teetering between extreme burnout and mental health, physical health struggles, and functioning. And it's always either or, but I want to find ways to have both. What we will learn about in this workbook is how our neurology affects our style of focus, different presentations of our focus style, why our focus style makes it difficult to transition, how social differences affect our ability to transition, how chronic dysregulation enables poor interoception, which worsens our struggle with transitions, what is our starting point, what are our levels, differences between tasks and activities, how to pair compatible tasks and activities, differences between big transitions and small transitions, how we can transition, where to integrate transitions into our day, and how to build a more sustainable schedule. So as you can see, this is how I usually like to build my workbooks out, is to have information in the beginning so that we establish a foundation and we slowly begin to intersperse our own experiences with the knowledge that we're learning, and then get to a point where there's the actual practical breakdown of all of this. Let's go to the third page. So what makes transitions hard for us? To simply put it, monotropism, autistic inertia, social differences, sensory differences. And this workbook is going to help break that down for you guys to explain why those 4 things make transitions difficult for us. Monotropism is a cognitive style that involves focusing on one or few things at a time rather than multitasking. It's the opposite of a polytropic brain, which can pay attention to many details at once, but only at a surface level. Monotropic minds tend to have their attention pulled more strongly towards a smaller number of interests at any given time, leaving fewer resources for other processes. Monotropic people can go deep into a subject and explore many details, but they may miss or forget things outside of their focus. I oftentimes find that when I'm working with autistic folks, when we read descriptions like that, we have a hard time understanding how that applies to ourselves. I think because of that, I like to give objective examples to give you guys a better idea of what to work off of, because when I give an example, someone can say, oh, that makes sense. That reminds me of this thing that I struggle with. And so in this next page, I give practical examples of what monotropic focus can look like, and that is hyperfocus, having special interests, not being able to or disinterested in maintaining a social life, difficulty having conversations outside of your special interests, and forgetting to take care of yourself. All right, so this next concept I am going to explain as well, because it is extremely important for us to understand to be able to fill this workbook out, and that is autistic inertia. So keep in mind these 2 things as you fill this workbook out: monotropic focus and autistic inertia. Autistic inertia is whatever interest is most aroused in a monotropic mind tends to pull in most of the processing resources. It is easier for autistic folks to process one channel at a time. Distributing our attention between multiple streams takes effort and sometimes just doesn't work at all. This naturally makes it harder to change tracks once inertia is reached. Okay, so this next page is called Metaphor Time. Metaphor time is going to be interspersed throughout the workbook whenever I am taking a concept and creating a metaphor out of it to help you guys understand the mechanisms of the definitions that I'm trying to teach. Bear with me here. Those of you who likes to understand things through metaphor, this is going to be your cup of tea. But for those of you who don't understand metaphors very well, I am so sorry. Try your best to understand what I'm teaching, and I'm going to try my best to explain it. When I am describing the relationship between monotropic focus and autistic inertia, I am describing it in terms of these three objects: the water hose, the spray bottle, and the cup of water. The amount of water represents how much focus you have. The power of the stream represents the intensity of your autistic inertia. And what I'm really trying to build out for you guys here is the concept of how much water do these things have and how powerful of a stream does it create. For autistic folks, we have different modes to represent where we are at with that monotropic focus and with the autistic inertia. The first mode I describe as the water hose. So this is when you are able to hyper-focus on one activity, your inertia keeps building, and you find yourself not wanting to stop. The second mode I describe as the spray bottle. So this one's a little bit more variable. Depending on how many things you have to get done, you may have to delegate your focus more sparingly. If so, the inertia doesn't get a chance to build. If you can afford to hyper-focus on one activity, then you may achieve inertia, but regardless, you still reach a point where you'd want to stop. All right, so the next mode is called cup of water. This one is usually what people experience when they are going through autistic burnout or autistic shutdown. It's having a limited source of water or no water at all that you're working off of, so you don't have any ability to focus on anything. And the water is stagnant. It just stays in that cup. So you're not building autistic inertia. You don't have energy. You don't have focus. This is when you are unable to reach inertia, regardless of how much focus you have access to. If I were to give you an example of each of these so that you can understand better how to apply this to yourself, a water hose mode for me would be me making this workbook, right? I could wake up early in the morning, hop straight on my computer, start working on this workbook all through the day with no breaks to eat, drink, get up to go to the bathroom. And then all of a sudden it's 10 p.m. at night and I get to a point where I am absolutely famished, probably feeling faint as well, and I have to go lay down on the couch and crash. But either way, I could have just kept going. During that time, even when I got physically ill and tired, I could have still kept working because that's just how focused I was, right? And an example of the spray bottle for me would be, let's say, a day where I have to go out and run multiple errands. I don't necessarily have passion to go run errands, right? So I have a set amount of focus for that day. After a certain amount of time, around 2 p.m., that focus runs out for me and I can't really focus on anything else or getting anything else completed. I have so much to do. Let's say to the grocery store, let's say to Target, let's say to see the doctors or pick up my dog's medication. I can't focus intensely on either of these tasks. It's just kind of one thing to the next to the next. So I can't really focus on one thing and build up inertia. The stream that is coming out of the spray bottle is a little bit more like a mist rather than a more directed, intense inertia. My cup of water mode is when I'm going through autistic burnout. I would spend 3 months basically rotting on my bed, barely able to eat or shower and take care of myself, and I'm not really able to focus on any sort of interests, hobbies, friends, or anything else. It's honestly just, it's sad to say, but you're honestly just a physical body, but there's nothing going on in your life. What does each of these modes look like for you? I'm going to give you guys some time to go ahead and fill out the bottom of this page and whether or not you yourself have experienced all three of these modes. And if you really want to go into detail, you could give an example for each mode and what that looks like for you. This will be a good time to pause the video to fill that out and then press play again when you're ready to move on to the next page. All right, so this next page asks, what activities or tasks usually allows you to tap into your autistic inertia and monotropic focus? What allows me to tap into my inertia and monotropic focus is when I am really inspired in work. There is something that I really want to bring to life, complete, put all this time and energy and passion into, like this workbook, for example, or sometimes if I'm really passionate about a video, that too. And I could just spend hours doing it and I don't want to stop, and I just want to talk about it all day with people, and I can't think about anything other than that. Even at the end of the day when I'm exhausted and needing to sleep and my eyes are closed, I'm just still thinking about it. Other things that I could get really focused in on is crocheting when there's a specific project that I want to complete. For example, if I'm crocheting a cardigan or a beanie or something like that, there's like an obvious goal to it and I just can't stop until I get it finished. Just think about that for you guys. What is something that you could get so hyper focused on where you can't do anything else or think about anything else, or it's really difficult for you to be able to pull yourself away from it and you could just keep going and going and going. You never get sick of it. That is your sweet spot. You love doing it, even if it's to the detriment of your own health sometimes, because that's how passionate and focused you are when you are doing it. This will be a good time to pause this video and write out as many examples as you can think of in that little box that I provided for you guys. All right, so in this next page, I further explore the concept of autistic inertia and I provide another visual or metaphor to help supplement the understanding of autistic inertia. When one accesses their autistic inertia, it not only makes it harder for them to stop what they're doing, but it also makes integrating the proper transitions even more crucial. If not, then one can become extremely dysregulated as a result. Dysregulation can worsen executive dysfunction and may even incapacitate one from being able to move on to the next activity. Think of it like this. It's impossible for sprinters to come to a complete stop without first slowing their pace down little by little. Right now is a perfect time, right? Because there's the going on and there's all these track stars that we're watching sprinting and whatnot. Whenever they've crossed that finish line, they don't ever come to a full stop immediately. They usually take some time to get themselves to slow down to a stopping pace. Think of your autistic inertia as those really powerful Olympic sprinters. Your inertia is most likely going to be a lot stronger and more intense than an average person because that is the epitome of how our brains work and how our monotropic focus works. In a way, it could be a superpower because that is more intense than a non-autistic person, but it could also be at your detriment when you have to transition and you are unable to do so because the inertia is so intense. Okay, so I'm gonna fast forward into page 14. This page is called Your Starting Point. The purpose of this little chart that I created is to get you guys familiar with what it looks like for you when you experience different combinations of being able to transition and being able to focus. We really want to understand the full scope of our own behavior patterns, right? A lot of the times we're not just that person who can only hyper-focus and nothing else. We probably do go through a lot of different variations and modes. Flip to the next page really quick to page 15. I actually give you a blank template to work off of. When you fill out that blank template, I want you to think about what would it look like if you are able to transition and are also able to focus? What does it look like for you when you are able to transition but you're not able to focus? What does it look like for you when you're not able to transition but you are able to focus? And the last one is, what does it look like for you when you are not able to transition and also not able to focus? If you flip back to page 14, I filled this out to give you an example of what that would look like for me. What does it look like if I'm able to transition and I'm able to focus at the same time? I'm able to transition and maintain focus, but I may struggle with burnout. So the quality of my life is good, I feel fulfilled until I run out of energy to maintain it all. On the surface, when I'm able to focus and transition, people may think, oh, Irene has her life together, it seems easy for her and she seems productive and whatnot, but people don't realize that everything always comes at a cost, right? Yes, I'm able to maintain life and I'm able to focus, but I can only do that for so long before I lose energy and I hit burnout and things like that. And likewise, I'm able to transition, but doing so is dysregulating and impacts my ability to focus. Quality of life is maintained, but not being able to reach inertia can be extremely dysregulating and lead to burnout. I have a suspicion that a lot of the high functioning autistics deal with this part. So they sacrifice their autistic needs for the ability to assimilate to the pace of society and concentrate on so many things at the same time. So what does it look like when you have to maintain all these things and you are functioning on the surface, but your autistic needs are being neglected? Yes, you're able to maintain life and the quality of life is decent, but you're suffering on a personal level. And then going below that, I'm not able to transition, but I'm able to focus. I feel like a lot of autistics tend to go through this part during their burnouts or during times where they could afford to not work and not do anything else and just focus on themselves. So maybe the weekends. I'm struggling to transition because I am consistently reaching autistic inertia. Even though I may feel regulated and fulfilled by my inertia, everything else in my life is being negatively impacted due to neglect. During my burnout time, I could be super fulfilled because I'm doing all these things that I'm interested in and hyper focusing. And as a result, I'm forgetting everything else I have to do in life, all my responsibilities, right? I'm just focused on that one or two things. Yes, I'm super, super happy and probably my mental health is at its best during this time, but objectively, my life is being neglected and you just can't do that as an adult, right? So that's what it looks like. And then the one below is, of course, the worst of the worst. I'm struggling to transition. I'm also unable to reach inertia. I may be struggling with a shutdown or depression. During this time, I am unable to maintain my quality of life and consistently dysregulated. So you're not getting any sort of fulfillment and you're just exhausted on top of it. Those are not good places to be. And I'm sure we've all experienced that as well. I feel like for most people, they probably fluctuate between those two middle ones often. If you guys agree with me and that's what you go through, let me know if I'm right. But regardless, this will be a good place to pause for you guys to fill this out. This is going to be your starting point. This is what you're dealing with. This isn't necessarily what you're always going to experience, especially if you are implementing proper transitions. But I think it's important to have an idea of what your starting point is if we are going to try to grow from that starting point. All right, so let's go into, sorry you guys, my cat just wanted to say hi really quick. She's so fluffy and warm. Okay, let's get back into it. Oh, now I'm distracted. Let me refocus. Okay, so in this next page, page 16, very similar thing. This template is what it looks like to be filled out. And then if you flip to page 17, I give you a blank template so that you guys could fill out exactly what your levels look like for you. But if you flip back to page 16, I gave you guys examples as to what it looks like for me, so it gives you something to work off of. The point in learning your levels is to get a good understanding of all the different ways you are impacted by distractions, because how we are impacted by distractions will vary in intensity. So we want to have a good idea of what those levels are for us. So for me, level 1, which is green, means that distraction is an inconvenience, but I could still focus back on the task. My cat distracting me just now would probably be a level 1 distraction. Level 2, which is yellow, is distraction is frustrating, but I can recover with some effort and focus back on the task. A level 2 distraction would be, let's say if someone knocked on my front door right now to deliver a package and I had to go answer the door and get the package inside and then come back and resume filming. That would probably dysregulate me enough and throw me enough off track where I need some time to get back to where I was at, but I could still resume, right? Level 3, which is orange for me, is distraction will throw me off track and I have to force myself to focus on the task even if I am dysregulated. So an example of that would be, let's say if the apartment maintenance guy were to come over right now to fix something in the house and it took longer than a few minutes and I had to interact back and forth with him, even if it's just some small talk back and forth, that simple distraction of being pulled away on top of switching gears into socializing is gonna be pretty dysregulating. And so even though I technically can come back pretty quickly in the grand scheme of things to my task, I'm dysregulated enough from having to switch gears to needing to put extra effort to switch back into my original gear. Level 4, which is red, is distraction will pull me completely out of focus and I can no longer return to my original task. I am upset, but I can focus my attention on other things. This is where I feel like in order for me to get distracted to a point where I can't return back to the task, something would have to happen in my personal life to get me emotionally dysregulated enough. So if I were to get bad news about a certain family member or loved one, or if I was having a hard time with a friend, these are things that would completely suck me out of being able to work because my priority system would be geared towards making sure that I was there to problem solve and interact with the person. Level 5, which is black, probably the worst level, is distraction will cause me enough distress to shut down and I can't focus on anything until I recover. So this one, I still experience to this day. It's just a part of life, right? It's if something's pretty significant is happening in my life, I need to focus all that time and energy on really taking care of myself and processing whatever is going on. Usually when I am in a level 5, I can't really do much other than meditate, sit outside, look at the trees, process, journal, and listen to music. It's almost like I'm in the basic survival mode and all of that energy is going towards that. But either way, this would be a good time to pause the video to fill out your levels and what that looks like for you specifically from green to black. And make sure you guys put a lot of thought into it because we are going to use this at the very end in order to implement transitions into our life. And that goes for any of these things that we're filling out. We're gonna be using these levels. We're gonna be using the water hose, water bottle metaphor as well. And then we are also going to be using that runner, sprinter, pace metaphor to map out what our transitions are going to look like. All right, so let's flip to the next page, which is page 18. This is again, establishing your starting point, establishing your baseline. I want you guys to reflect on what your daily function is when it comes to focus, autistic inertia, being able to or not being able to transition, or the negative impacts it has on you. And I want you to be realistic about it in this prompt. It's important to be realistic when we are talking about habit forming, because if you are talking about, well, I hope to do this, or I should be doing this, or I would like to do this, that does not matter, okay? You have to be realistic. These are things I am able to muster up energy to do. This is usually what my pattern is. I fail at this even though I really want to be able to be good at it. And I want to do this, but realistically, I don't see myself being able to. You know, be realistic as possible on this page. Be brutally honest. If you are able to do that and let go of that expectation of yourself to just radically accept what is, it is a lot more freeing than you can think, right? A part of being brutally honest in that way is being able to build habits realistically as well, because the worst thing you could do is approach new habit building the way that media has been encouraging us to do all this time, which is this is all the ways that you're failing and suffering, and just transform your life and turn into a new person overnight. And you just have to put 110% effort and you're going to be completely different. That does not work for our nervous system. That does not work for neurodivergence. That does not work for autistics. We are people who are going to transition slowly, take little steps here and there, see little bits of progress, even put effort and consistency and not even see progress. But that's just what it takes. This is what we have to keep in mind here. And for those of you who also have ADHD like me, this is the hardest part, is to be patient, be realistic, because sometimes I know that those of us with ADHD can bank on the inspiration and passion of a newfound habit to transform our lives. But when it comes down to actually putting in the work day by day and laying it brick by brick, because of the lack of dopamine, we lose interest and then we give up. Don't let that be you. Be realistic and give yourself actual tangible steps to work towards. Let's now go to the next page, which is page 19. Let's now be a little bit idealistic. This is the fun part. What would you want your daily function to look like? So the first one is going to be what's actually happening. The second part is what you want to happen. Okay? Pretty simple, right? Let's take some time to reflect on that, write it down, stream of consciousness. This would be a good time to, again, pause. This is where we could really go into manifesting in a realistic way. I like to be idealistic. I like to be positive, but I also like to be very, very blatantly realistic as well. All right, so moving on. This is the philosophy I want you guys to stop taking forward with this. Forcing yourself to transition whenever and however, regardless of how it impacts you, or neglecting yourself because of your inability to transition properly. Why? Because it's dysregulating you. You're unable to fully perform because you're not tapping into your focus style. It negatively impacts your well-being. It has physical health consequences that exacerbates all of the problems listed above. Again, I'm being brutally realistic here. I don't want you guys to force yourself to do something to your detriment, and I also don't want you guys to be complacent and suffer the consequences of that. There is a way to change and implement those changes so that you can reap the benefits of it, but also build a life that's more sustainable to you and feels better to you. So let's do that together. Moving on to the next page. This is the philosophy I want you guys to inherit. Better transitions means understanding your pacing and also using methods that helps better transition you from one pace to the next. This leads to less dysregulation, clear cognitive function, more energy, life is more sustainable, and you are more fulfilled. Sound good? Okay, let's do it. In this next slide, page 22, I am breaking down the differences between tasks and activities. Most people wouldn't even really think that it's different or think that it would matter, but it does matter. It does matter if you're neurodivergent. It does matter if you're autistic. It does matter if you have monotropic focus, and it does matter if you deal with autistic inertia. So let's break it down and understand those mechanisms a little bit more. Tasks is linear. It has a clear goal. It focuses on outcomes and results. It's objective. Activities, on the other hand, is non-linear. It focuses more on sensing and feeling. It's more subjective. It's more about an experience. And I gave you guys a visual of what that would mean. So a task is having one starting point and having an end point. Because of that, one may struggle with transitioning out of a task because you don't want to stop until you've completed your task or perfected it. If you tend to have like a perfectionistic personality, you may have a hard time being able to stop a task because you get so sucked into the end product. And if that hasn't happened yet, you want to keep going until it happens. An activity is just like a circular thing with no definitive start, middle, end, right? One may struggle with transitioning out of an activity because you may not know when to stop. So not having a clear start, middle, end may get you completely lost in an activity, and therefore you don't really know when to stop or how to stop or whatever. Either way, one may struggle with transitioning out of an activity or task because once you've reached inertia, you may not want to stop. So let's move on to the next page where you're going to fill out what are the tasks and what are the activities that you commonly have to tend to. This is just an easy checklist, whatever you could think about. This one's important because a few pages from now, we're going to have to refer back to what our tasks and activities are. So you're kind of just laying out the groundwork so that you don't have to put extra brain power then. This will be a good place to pause and fill that out. All right, so now we're moving on to the next page, which is another metaphor time. Anytime you guys see metaphor, know that it's going to be utilized in the end of the workbook where we're actually planning things out. So really pay attention whenever there's a metaphor time. In this metaphor, I'm explaining the different flavors of activities and tasks. So what that means is a certain activity or task is going to have a primary flavor to it. Let's say going to therapy has an emotional flavor to it, right? Which again, the same task could have different flavors for different people, which is why I like this workbook, because you are going to build it out for yourself. So therapy could be emotional for me, but mental for another person, right? Either way, identifying a task and activity to its specific flavor is going to be really helpful because you could then identify what tasks and activities are going to be compatible with each other, because certain flavor profiles are going to be more compatible with each other than others. So if therapy has an emotional flavor to me, whereas work has a mental flavor, they don't necessarily go hand in hand together, because when I'm at work, I'm not necessarily emotionally in tune. It's more so about ones and ohs and getting things done. And so if I were to have to switch from work mode to now needing to think about my emotions and process that, I'm going to have a hard time transitioning back and forth. Whereas if I went to therapy, but then I, after that, would go see a friend, I feel like having an emotional activity go along with a social activity kind of flows a little bit better together, because I'm talking with people in both activities and I'm accessing emotions and connectedness in both activities. And I listed out the different flavors that we're gonna use. There's mental, there's verbal, there's physical, there's social, and there's emotional and spiritual. I also want to quickly add that the way that I ordered this is purposeful. So mental and spiritual are opposite ends of the spectrum, and then it kind of incrementally moves from one end of the spectrum to the other. And this is something to keep in mind when you are labeling your tasks and activities from here on out. And so therefore, the compatibility of the flavors is determined by what neighboring flavors are surrounding it. So mental and verbal could go pretty hand in hand. Spiritual and emotional can go pretty hand in hand. And then I feel like a good middle ground between mental and spiritual is physical. Hope this kind of cleared things up. Okay, so moving on to the next one. Now we're going to take all of those tasks and activities and attach a primary flavor to all of them. You could either copy and paste that list onto this page or rewrite it out. And if you really want to be thorough, you could use color markers or, colored highlighters to be able to write this out. All right, so I'm going to make a really quick list of what my tasks are. Okay, so let's say work is one of them. Getting ready is another one. Because come on, you guys, like your morning routine and getting ready for the day, that is a task. Some people might be able to do it without using spoons, but if you're neurodivergent, you most likely use spoons to just do the basic. Cooking is another task, especially during the work week. Pilates is another task. Appointments is another one, because I go to a lot of doctor's appointments. Now I'm gonna attach a primary flavor to each of these. So work is going to be mental. Getting ready is physical. Cooking is going to be physical as well. Pilates is going to be physical. And appointments is going to be social. So activities, seeing loved ones is an activity. Watching TV. And honestly, this one might be confusing, but running errands is an activity. Because with how I run errands now, I don't have a clear idea of what I have to do. I just allow myself to go where I need to go, and then I just need to get whatever I need to get there. And I allow myself time to kind of get distracted and go off track if I need to, if I want to just look around and, stim and things like that. So running errands becomes an activity because I could just do whatever I want there and get lost. Now let's attach flavors to these activities. So seeing loved ones is social. Watching TV is emotional for me. And running errands is, physical. All right, so we have that list, okay? Now we're gonna go and highlight what we think are going to be compatible activities. So when I talk about compatible activities, what it means is it could differ in flavor, right? But the flavors go well together. So it allows you to transition from one thing to the next more seamlessly than you would expect. And let me give you an example of that. Let's color code this because that always helps me. Let's start off with orange. So whatever I highlight with orange means that they go together. Usually getting ready goes with seeing loved ones pretty well, because when I get ready before going to socialize, it kind of allows me some time to center myself, get right with my thoughts, and prepare for social interactions. Again, getting ready by myself allows me to just be in my own energy really quick, and it just goes hand in hand pretty well. The next highlighter color I'm gonna do in green. So this one's weird, but cooking goes well with watching TV for me because I like leaving the TV on and having myself listen to it while also looking at it every now and then while I'm cooking, because as I'm cutting up the vegetables and cooking all the food, I could allow myself to stim and concentrate on something else. But as well as I'm concentrating on TV, my body is doing something. So that's a symbiotic pairing of the two. And likewise, when I'm cooking and already watching TV and I'm done cooking, I could bring the food over and continue watching the TV while I'm eating and things like that. So I could kind of seamlessly transition in and out of those things. Let's do blue next. Okay, so work goes pretty hand in hand with Pilates for me, because when I'm working, it's all mental. I'm thinking and thinking and thinking, working. I'm not really tapped into emotions. I'm not really doing anything else. So Pilates is a great way for me to go from work to moving my body. And when I'm moving my body and doing Pilates, it allows my thoughts space to kind of keep running and going, but maybe even transition from thinking about work to thinking about other parts of my life and my day. So yeah, that's an example of being able to pair things together that work together. And this one's going to be really important because at the very end, when we're building out our schedules to be more compatible and work better for us, we are going to use this concept of pairing things together that actually are compatible in flavors. And likewise, you're able to see what activities and tasks you had previously put together that aren't necessarily compatible in flavors, and then you could really pinpoint why you struggle. Okay, you could go ahead and pause this video and then go through filling this part out on your own, and when you're ready, let's move on to the next part. All right, so this next page, which is page 26, I am breaking down what the two transitions are. So big T transitions, we use big transitions when we've built up a lot of autistic inertia and or the tasks of the day are incompatible in flavor and we need more help to stop what we are doing to transition properly into the next activity. So if you think about it this way, you need a big T transition when transitioning is a lot harder for you. And what makes transitions hard is either you have a lot of autistic inertia and you don't want to stop, but you have to, or transitioning from one activity to the next is hard to do because the shifting of gears is so intense because of the incompatible activities that you need a bigger implementation of transition. Whereas small T transitions, we use small transitions when there's less of a need to break the inertia. This can happen because your tasks for the day are similar in flavors, or you just don't build up much inertia to begin with. Pretty easy to understand, right? Let's move on to the next page. I break down the big T and small T transitions in even more detail because again, we do well with not only knowing the concept itself, but understanding the objective examples of this. Again, this is just a baseline. If you have to adjust this more or less to fit your needs, feel free to do so, but I just wanted to give you guys a starting point. Big T transitions is between 30 minutes to an hour of transition time. It's where you integrate a change in environment, you diffuse previous inertia and make internal space for the next activity. You stop loading yourself with more sensory input, sensory regulation through expelling energy out and away from you. I think changing your environment does really help with transitioning yourself a lot more intensely, because if you stay in one environment and do a bunch of things in there, it makes it harder to indicate to your body that it's time to move on to the next task. I think this is why a lot of the times kids, when they're in school, when let's say they get really sucked into coloring something and then all of a sudden the teacher's like, all right, put your pencils away and then let's now do math. Those autistic kids have a really hard time understanding it's time to move on because they're still staying in the same desk. They're still in the same classroom. Everything's the same except the activity is now changing. Whereas if they were to be coloring in the art room and then now needing to move on to the classroom to learn something, I feel like changing the environment not only helps your mind transition, but it also helps your body understand that it's time to transition. So if you're working from home and you need to go do another activity, try not to do everything in your office. Try to have specific activities delegated to different environments. And if you don't have that choice and you kind of have one small space, taking a break outside for 30 minutes to an hour and then coming back, it helps a lot. So diffusing previous inertia means that you stop your activity because you can't keep tapping back into it, right? If you already built up inertia, you're going to be thinking about it no matter what you're doing or whether or not you've already moved on. You're just going to constantly think about it. So allow yourself time to just stop doing that activity and allow the inertia to slowly diffuse and work its way out of your system. A lot of the times this means some form of physical practice. So for example, I build up a lot of inertia during work, going from work into a physical activity like on a 3-mile walk or going to Pilates for an hour. That physical activity allows me enough time, environmental changes, and movement to get all of that energy out of my body and allow me to still be moving and have momentum, but better transition me from work to coming back home and getting my evening started. Examples of small T transitions is something between 5 to 30 minutes. It could look like body scans and check-ins, tend to your physical needs, like drinking water, eating a snack, going to the bathroom, regulate through stimming and body movement, so standing up and pacing back and forth, or stretching your body and doing some body movements in general, taking a moment to breathe and center yourself, so taking some intentional deep belly breaths, maintain consistent energy flow and pacing with moments of pause and regulation. So pretty easy to understand, right? All right, so this is where we are going to build out our schedules in extreme painful detail and implement the transitions needed. This is where the juice is. This is where the meat of all of this workbook is. This is where the magic happens, okay? I gave you guys an instructions paper that goes through exactly what you have to do. And this is going to correlate to all of the following pages. Let's quickly flip from page 28 to page 29. As you can see, this is a template for your day. And I give you guys a template for each day. So there's going to be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Okay? Now let's flip back to the instructions list. That is going to be applicable to all of this template. But the purpose of this is every single day is going to look somewhat different, and it should be planned out intricately to fit your needs. And ideally, you could plan it out so that everything works somewhat symbiotically together enough where you're still getting things done and it's sustainable to you, feels right to you, okay? That is the purpose of this whole thing, because we are going to have better transitions and we're going to pair activities and tasks together a lot more compatibly. And if you can't afford to do that for whatever reason, that's fine. You will at least know why you're suffering and struggling. At the very minimum, you will at least have awareness of why you are suffering and struggling. We're going to start off with where we are at with our focus. For me, starting off today, I feel like I am a water hose because I have a lot of focus and I have a lot of drive in order to do one specific task at work. I want to complete it. I have a clear goal in mind. I'm just ready to go, right? Moving on to the levels, I'm going to say that I'm at a level 4 because if I were to get distracted from my work for whatever reason, I'm going to have a really hard time getting back to it, and then that's going to frustrate me a lot. This is a good way to understand why you might be a little more sensitive that day. So for example, if this day goes perfectly fine and I don't get distracted, great. But if one little thing happens and I wasn't expecting it and it throws me off track, I can really understand, okay, that makes a lot of sense because I know I was at a level 4. And the next thing I'm going to circle is the sprinter because I have a lot of focus. I have a clear goal. I don't want to get distracted. So I'm going to build up a lot of autistic inertia today during work. And then this little green box in the corner is a way for you to solidify where you're at with your focus, your spoons, and your inertia, just because you want to really nail that into your head. All right, so let's move on to the next half of this template. Step 4 is to list all of the tasks and activities that you have for the day. So for me, I am going to write out in painful detail everything I'm going to be doing today. That's going to be waking up. That's going to be getting ready. That's going to be making coffee, walking the dogs, replying to loved ones, work, Pilates, shower, walking the dogs, eating dinner, watching TV, and then getting ready for bed. After I write out what I have to do for the day, I'm going to label each of those things as an activity or as a task, just so I can have an idea of, does this thing have an end goal, or is this something that I could kind of get lost in? Waking up for me is an activity at this point in my life because I don't necessarily have to wake up at a certain time or in a certain way. I could kind of wake up whenever I need to and mosey around or not mosey around as much as I would want to. Getting ready and making coffee, of course, is a task because there's objective things that I have to do. You guys understand where I'm going with this, right? And the next thing that we're gonna have to do is highlight all of the activities and tasks that you usually struggle to transition in and out of. So for me, work is definitely something I struggle transitioning in and out of, and then also eating is one of those things. The next thing we would want to do is identify the flavors of each activity and task. Waking up to me is a spiritual experience, I feel like, because that is a time where I could check in with myself, reflect on the dreams that I had the previous night, reflect on what it is I want to do for today, and check in with how I feel, check in with any sort of goals that I want to address for that day, both personally and with my work and things like that. So waking up for me is definitely a spiritual experience. Getting ready and making coffee are both physical. It's just a mindless task that I do and my body is moving through it. Walking my dogs in the morning is social for me because I do that with my partner before they leave for work. And so that is kind of our time to talk, check in with each other before we go our separate ways for the day. And replying to loved ones is, of course, social because I'm communicating, interacting, and connected to my friends or family, whoever I'm talking to. Work is a mental task. So it's all thoughts and thinking, and I'm not really moving my body. I'm not really tapped into emotions during work. All mental, right? Pilates is physical. It's not something I really have to think about. It's not really something that is emotional. It's just me moving my body, exerting energy, exerting out all of that inertia that I built up previously from work. And shower is a spiritual experience for me because that is a time for me to really decompress. I try to have that be an experience that helps me physically regulate even more. Sometimes I like to shower with all of the lights off so that I'm not being overstimulated, and it kind of allows me to continue to tap into my body and my senses. And I usually like to listen to music or a podcast while I'm showering as well. And then the next thing is walking dogs and eating dinner. Those are both physical because those are things that I do by myself, and it's just something that I do with my body. And then watching TV is an emotional experience for me because as I'm watching TV, I'm usually processing what's going on and, feeling things as a response. And then getting ready for bed is spiritual for me because, like waking up, going to bed, I'm reflecting on the day, I'm connecting to myself in a spiritual sense. So those are the flavors that I'm assigning to all of the tasks and activities for this day. The next thing that we're going to want to do is identify whether they are compatible or not. Just looking at my schedule now, there are points where things are not necessarily compatible and other points where things are somewhat compatible. So for example, the end of my day where there's emotional and spiritual, those are two compatible activities, right? They flow together. But I would say the most incompatible part of my day is the first part. So going from spiritual to physical to social to mental, as you can see, there's a lot of different things going on and they're not necessarily compatible with each other, but it's not necessarily really bad either. I can kind of identify that as generally a pain point, which is tolerable so long as you have proper transitions, right? The next thing that we're going to want to do is integrate small or big transitions in between those main activities. What I did here is I grouped together the same flavors. So getting ready and making coffee, since they're both physical activities, I grouped them together. And then walking dogs, replying to loved ones, because they're both social, I grouped them together. Here's the key that you want to keep in mind. If you had previously highlighted in red what your pain points are, so for me, work and eating dinner, in between those two things, you want to integrate a big transition, okay? And likewise, every time you look at your schedule and you see a physical flavor, you could kind of use that as a small transition if you don't already integrate one, because small transitions is physical movement, physical check-ins, right? And so, for example, between waking up and walking my dogs, I'm doing physical things like getting ready, making coffee, and things like that. That in and of itself could be a small transition if you want it to be. With that being said, I'm going to identify where I need to put my small transitions first. And I could see already that the activities that don't have something physical in between is walking dogs and work. So going from social to mental, there's no physical in between that. So I'm gonna put a small transition there. And then I'm gonna put a small transition going from emotional to spiritual because there's no physical activity in between those. An example of a small transition going from replying to loved ones to work is to simply check in with myself, take some breaths, stretch a little bit, and then get settled down to go to work. And then a small transition going from watching TV to getting ready for bed is again, taking some breaths, checking in with my body, stretching. And then I'm gonna actually use Pilates, shower, walking dogs as my big transition because it's change of environment. It's multiple different sort of physical activities, and the amount of time I spend on those things probably spans anywhere between an hour to 2 hours. So I basically have around 2 hours of physical activity to transition from work to eating. So I'm gonna count that as my big transition. You really, really wanna make sure that when you highlight your pain points in your day, you give yourself a really decent chunk, a big transition between those two activities, or else you're gonna have a really, really hard time getting into the flow for the rest of the day. But either way, I ended the workbook with tips when it comes to planning for your days and integrating transitions more effectively. So yes, you guys, this concludes the end of today's video where we are filling out this workbook together. Again, if you haven't yet, go visit the link down below to go purchase the workbook. It's only $7 and it really, really does help me out so much to continue doing the work that I'm doing. I really appreciate you guys for being able to support me as I support you. If this workbook has helped out in any sort of way, I would love to hear about that experience in the comment section down below. I hope you guys have a better understanding of the importance of transitions in your day-to-day lives. I hope this helps bring a lot more clarity and sustainability to your life as well. Thank you guys for being a part of my community. I will be sure to see you guys on next week's video. Take care.